The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the ballroom of the Metropolitan Grand Hotel, where Seattle's elite had gathered for the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala. Vincent Blackwood stood near the auction display, his tailored charcoal suit and silver tie making him appear every inch the formidable CEO of Blackwood Industries. At 42, he commanded respect through quiet authority rather than loud demands, his steel-gray eyes taking in every detail of the evening's proceedings. Vincent, the mayor, wants to discuss the waterfront development project, Rebecca Sterling approached, her clipboard clutched against her emerald dress. As the event coordinator, she'd been orchestrating this evening for months, and every detail had to be perfect. He nodded curtly. 5 minutes. I want to check on the catering setup first. Rebecca raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. Blackwood was known for his attention to detail, but his concern for the service staff was something few people knew about. He believed that treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their position, was fundamental to good leadership. As he moved toward the service entrance, Vincent noticed a young woman struggling with an enormous silver tray laden with champagne. Flutes. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and wearing the standard black and white catering uniform. Name tag read Nora. The tray wobbled dangerously as she navigated between the guests, her face flushed with concentration and what looked like anxiety. Vincent watched as she tried to balance the weight, while avoiding the flowing gowns and gesturing hands of the socialites. When the tray tilted precariously to one side, threatening to send dozens of glasses crashing to the marble floor, Vincent instinctively stepped forward. Without thinking, he reached out to steady the tray, his hand briefly making contact with her forearm. The reaction was immediate and violent. Nora jerked away as if she'd been burned, her eyes wide with terror. The tray slipped from her grasp, and only Vincent's quick reflexes prevented a complete disaster as he caught it before it could fall. But the damage was done. The sudden movement had caused several glasses to topple, champagne splashing across the floor and onto nearby guests. A hush fell over the immediate area as conversations stopped and heads turned toward the commotion. Nora stood frozen, her face pale as paper, trembling hands pressed against her chest. Her breathing came in short, panicked gasps, and her dark eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal seeking escape. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "I'm so sorry, please. I didn't mean." The whispers began immediately. Vincent could hear fragments of conversations around them. Who was that girl? How unprofessional. Someone should speak to the catering manager. But Vincent's focus remained entirely on Nora. He saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten, a fear that went far deeper than embarrassment over spilled champagne. This wasn't the reaction of someone who'd simply made a mistake at work. This was the response of someone who'd been hurt before. Setting the salvaged tray on a nearby table, Vincent stepped closer to Nora, but slowly, deliberately keeping his movements visible and non-threatening. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, completely different from his usual commanding tone. "It's all right," he said softly, ensuring only she could hear him. "You're safe. Everything is fine."
Ow.
Rebecca appeared at his side, clearly flustered. "Mr. Blackwood, I apologize for this disruption. I'll have someone clean this up immediately and speak to the catering company about." "No need," Vincent interrupted, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "Accidents happen." The crowd around them was beginning to return to their conversations, the moment of drama passing as staff members quickly cleaned up the spilled champagne. But Vincent noticed that Nora was still shaking, still looking like she might bolt at any second. He made a decision that would surprise everyone who thought they knew him. "Excuse me for a moment," he said to Rebecca, then looked directly at Nora. "Would you mind if we stepped somewhere quieter, just to make sure you're all right?"
After.
Vincent watched as Nora's eyes darted nervously between him and the bustling ballroom behind them. Her breathing was still shallow, and he could see the internal battle playing out across her features, the desire to flee warring with what appeared to be ingrained obedience. I should get back to work," she stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. "They'll fire me if I'm not." "No one is going to fire you," Vincent said quietly. his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. I promise you that. But I'd like to make sure you're feeling better before you continue working, he gestured toward a service corridor that led away from the main event space. There's a quiet room just down here where we can talk. You have my word that you're not in any trouble. Nora hesitated, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Finally, she gave a small nod and began walking toward the corridor, her steps uncertain. The service area was a stark contrast to the opulent ballroom fluorescent lighting, plain walls, and the constant hum of kitchen equipment. Vincent led her to a small break room that was mercifully empty, gesturing for her to sit in one of the plastic chairs around a simple table. "Can I get you some water?" he asked, moving slowly to a small refrigerator in the corner. "You don't have to," Nora began, but Vincent was already retrieving a bottle of water. Opening it before setting it gently on the table in front of her, he took a seat across from her, careful to maintain distance between them. In the harsh fluorescent light, he could see details he'd missed in the ballroom, the way she favored her left side slightly, as if protecting old injuries, and the faint shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "My name is Vincent," he said, deliberately omitting his title. "And you're Nora, according to your name tag?" She nodded, taking a small sip of water with hands that were finally beginning to steady. "Vincent Blackwood," she said quietly. "I know who you are." Everyone working tonight was briefed about the important guests. He leaned back in his chair, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Well, right now I'm just someone who wants to make sure you're okay." That reaction earlier that wasn't about spilled champagne, was it? Nora's grip tightened on the water bottle, and for a moment Vincent thought she might shut down completely. But then something in her posture shifted, as if his genuine concern had created a crack in whatever walls she'd built around herself. "Don't like being touched," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "especially by ... by men I don't know. It's not your fault. You were trying to help, and her voice broke slightly, "I overreacted." "You didn't overreact," Vincent said firmly. "You had a completely normal response to something that felt threatening to you. There's nothing wrong with that." The surprise on her face was evident. Clearly, she'd expected judgment. Maybe anger, but not understanding. "Most people don't see it that way," she said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "Most people think I should just get over it, that I'm being dramatic or attention-seeking." Vincent felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, not at her, but at whoever had made her feel that her trauma wasn't valid. He kept his expression calm, though, knowing that any display of strong emotion might frighten her. "Those people are wrong," he said simply, "and they clearly don't understand what you've been through." Asterisk. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the distant sounds of the gala filtering through the walls. Vincent made no move to rush her or demand explanations. Instead, he simply waited, offering the kind of patient presence that Nora clearly wasn't used to receiving. "I should probably get back," she said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "The other servers will have to cover for me, and that's not fair to them." "Actually," Vincent said, pulling out his phone, "I think I have a better idea." He scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. "Marcus, it's Vincent. I need you to come to the service break room near the main kitchen. Yes. Now. Yeah. And bring Rebecca with you." Nora looked alarmed. "What are you doing?" "Making sure you get home safely tonight," Vincent said, putting his phone away. "Making sure you don't have to worry about your job. Marcus is my head of security. He's good people, I promise. And Rebecca can handle the rest of your shift. Can't just..." Nora began, but Vincent held up a gentle hand. Asterisk, "I can, and I am." Sometimes people in positions of power need to use that power to protect others. Consider this one of those times. For the first time since the incident in the ballroom, Vincent saw something like hope flicker across Nora's features. It was a small thing, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. And as they waited for Marcus and Rebecca to arrive, Vincent was already making mental notes about phone calls he needed to make once he got home that evening. Asterisk. Detective Patricia Wong had been with the Seattle Police Department for 15 years. But she still wasn't used to getting calls from billionaire CEOs at 11:30 on a Friday night. She sat in her Crown Victoria outside Vincent Blackwood's Bellevue penthouse, reviewing her notes one more time before heading inside. The doorman had been expecting her, which suggested this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision on Blackwood's part. Whatever had prompted this late-night meeting, he'd been planning it for hours. Vincent answered the door himself. Having traded his formal gala attire for dark jeans and a navy sweater, the transformation made him appear more approachable, though. Patricia could still sense the controlled intensity that had made him one of the most successful entrepreneurs on the West Coast. "Detective Wong, thank you for coming so late," he said, gesturing her into a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington. "Can I offer you coffee? I have a feeling this might take a while." "Coffee would be good," Patricia replied, settling into a leather chair and pulling out her notebook. "Your call was pretty cryptic, Mr. Blackwood. Something about suspicious activity at tonight's charity event?" Vincent moved to an expensive-looking espresso machine, his movements precise and deliberate. "I need to tell you about something that happened tonight, and I need you to understand that the young woman involved is not to be considered a suspect or even a witness unless absolutely necessary. She's been through enough." Patricia raised an eyebrow. In her experience, when powerful men started making demands about protecting women, there was usually more to the story. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" As Vincent prepared their coffee, he recounted the evening's events, Nora's violent reaction to being touched, their conversation in the break room, and the fragments of information she'd reluctantly shared about her past. "She mentioned being brought here 2 years ago," Vincent said, setting a cup in front of Patricia. "Not moving here, not coming here for work, brought here. She has no family, no permanent address that she's willing to share. And she's working for cash through a temp agency that specializes in event staffing." Patricia's pen had stopped moving. "What kind of temp agency?" "Prestige Personnel Services. They supplied most of the catering staff for tonight's event." Vincent pulled out his tablet and showed her a web page. "On the surface, everything looks legitimate. But when I started digging deeper after I got home, some things didn't add up." He swiped through several screens of information. "The company was founded 3 years ago by someone named Harold Ashford. He's also the owner of several other businesses: import, export, hospitality services, a few restaurants, and he was one of the sponsors for tonight's gala." Tricia looked up from her notes. "You think this Ashford is involved in trafficking?" "I think Nora Chenef, that's even her real name, is terrified of something or someone. And her terror is connected to how she ended up in Seattle," Vincent said. "When I mentioned calling the police earlier, she panicked. Not because she's done anything wrong, but because she's afraid that getting involved with law enforcement will make her situation worse." Patricia had worked enough trafficking cases to recognize the pattern. The victims were often told that police couldn't be trusted, that cooperation would lead to deportation or worse. The fear became so ingrained that even when help was offered, they couldn't accept it. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Mr. Blackwood?" Vincent leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "I want you to investigate Harold Ashford and his businesses, quietly, thoroughly, and without involving Nora, unless you absolutely have to. I think there might be other women in similar situations. What makes you think I'll open an investigation based on one person's reaction at a party?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, staring out at the dark water of the lake. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Because 3 years ago, my sister Emma was found dead in a shipping container in Tacoma. The official cause was an overdose, but she'd been clean for 2 years before she disappeared. The case went cold because there wasn't enough evidence to pursue the trafficking angle." Patricia felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. This wasn't just about helping a frightened young woman. This was personal. "I've spent the last 3 years funding private investigators, supporting anti-trafficking organizations, and learning everything I could about how these operations work," Vincent continued. "I know what the signs look like, Detective Wong, and I saw those signs in Nora tonight." Patricia closed her notebook and looked directly at him. "If I do this, if I open an investigation, I need your word that you won't interfere. No private investigators, no trying to rescue anyone on your own. These people are dangerous, and they don't hesitate to eliminate threats. You have my word, Vincent said immediately. But I want regular updates, and I want to know if you need resources that the department can't provide. Patricia stood up, draining the last of her coffee. I'll start by running background checks on Ashford and his associates. If there's something there, we'll find it. She paused at the door. What about the girl, Nora? She's staying in a safe. Location tonight, Vincent replied. And starting Monday, she'll have a new job with full benefits and no questions asked. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to give them a reason to trust that not everyone is going to hurt them. As Patricia drove home through the empty Seattle streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be bigger than either she or Vincent Blackwood anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner. Got your message? Already started running prelim searches on Harold Ashford. You're not going to like what I found. She pressed the accelerator a little harder. It was going to be a long weekend. Asterisk 6 weeks later. Detective Patricia Wang sat in a surveillance van 3 blocks from the Aurora Industrial District. Watching Harold Ashford's import warehouse through a telephoto lens, what had started as a favor to a concerned CEO had exploded into the largest human trafficking investigation Seattle had seen in a decade. Alpha Team in position, came the voice through her earpiece. Agent Michael Torres from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force had taken over the operation. 2 weeks earlier, when Patricia's investigation had uncovered connections spanning 3 states and 2 countries, the evidence they'd gathered was staggering. Ashford's businesses were fronts for an operation that brought women from Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe into the United States under false pretenses, then forced them into domestic servitude, restaurant work, and worse. The temp agency had been the perfect cover-moving women from job to job, never keeping them in one place long enough for anyone to ask questions. Detective Wong, Agent Torres's voice crackled through the radio. We need you at the safe house. Chen is asking for you. Patricia's stomach tightened. Nora had been the key to breaking the case open, but getting her to trust law enforcement had been a delicate process. It had taken Vincent Blackwood's patient advocacy and the testimony of 2 other women they'd managed to locate before. Nora had agreed to cooperate. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in Ballard, guarded by federal agents around the clock. Patricia found Nora in the living room, looking stronger than she had 6 weeks ago, but still fragile. Her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. You wanted to see me? Patricia asked gently, taking a seat across from her. Nora nodded, her voice steady but quiet. I know today is the day you arrest them, Harold and the others. She took a deep breath. I want to tell you about the other women, the ones who might still be there. Over the next hour, Nora painted a horrifying picture of the operation's scope. She'd been brought to the United States 18 months earlier, not 2 years, as she'd originally told Vincent. The extra months had been spent in a house in Tacoma with 8 other women, all of them working off manufactured debts to their traffickers. There was a woman named Emma, Nora said suddenly, causing Patricia to look up sharply from her notes. She tried to help some of us escape about 6 months ago. Harold was furious when they brought her back. She kept saying she had a brother who would come looking for her, that she wasn't some nobody without family. Patricia felt her pulse quicken. Emma, do you remember her last name? Blackwood, Nora whispered. Name was Emma Blackwood. After she died, Harold used her as an example of what happened to women who tried to run. The pieces fell into place. With brutal clarity, Vincent Blackwood's sister hadn't died of an overdose in a random shipping container. She'd been murdered by the same organization they were about to bring down. Nora, Patricia said carefully, I need you to tell Agent Torres everything you just told me. Every detail about Emma, about the house in Tacoma, about the other women. Can you do that? Nora nodded, her jaw set with determination. I can do that. Emma saved my life once, talked Harold out of selling me to someone worse. I owe her that much. 2 hours later, Patricia stood outside the warehouse as federal agents led Harold. Ashford and 6 of his associates away in handcuffs. The raid had been flawlessly executed, 12 women rescued, thousands of documents seized, and a network that had operated for years finally dismantled. Vincent Blackwood arrived at the scene just as the last of the evidence was being loaded into trucks. Patricia had called him as soon as the arrests were complete, knowing he'd want to be there. "How many?" he asked without preamble. 12 women rescued today," Patricia replied. "But we think there are more. Nora's testimony has given us leads. In Portland and Vancouver, this is just the beginning." Vincent's expression was unreadable as he watched the warehouse being sealed off with crime scene tape. "Nora mentioned Emma, didn't she?" Patricia wasn't surprised that he'd guessed. "She did. Vincent, I'm sorry. Emma tried to help the other women escape. She was a hero." For a moment, Vincent's carefully maintained composure cracked. Patricia could see the grief he'd been carrying for 3 years. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "She would have been proud of what Nora did today," he said. "Emma always believed in fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves." Agent Torres approached them, removing his tactical vest. "Blackwood, I wanted to personally thank you for bringing this to our attention. Without your initial call, we might never have uncovered this operation." Vincent shook his hand, but his attention was already shifting to the future. What happens to the women now? Those who want to stay in the United States will be connected with victim services and legal assistance for their immigration status, Torres explained. Others may choose to return to their home countries with support for reintegration. And Nora. Patricia smiled for the first time in weeks. Nora has decided to stay. She wants to work with other survivors, help them navigate the system. I've already been accepted into a community college program for social work. As the federal agents finished their work and began clearing the scene, Vincent stood quietly for a few minutes, looking at the warehouse where his sister had likely spent her final days. When he finally turned to leave, Patricia could see that something fundamental had shifted in him. The investigation was over. But for Vincent Blackwood, the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the raid on Harold Ashford's warehouse, Vincent Blackwood stood at the podium in the main conference room of Blackwood Industries, looking out at an audience that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Survivors of human trafficking sat alongside corporate executives. FBI agents next to social workers, all gathered for the launch of the Emma Blackwood Foundation's newest initiative. "When my company began this partnership with the Survivor Leadership Collective," Vincent said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "I thought I understood what we were trying to accomplish. I was wrong. Women and men in this room have taught me that survival is just the first step. What comes after rebuilding, healing, finding purpose, that's where the real work begins." In the front row, Nora Chen sat with perfect posture, wearing a navy blazer that she'd chosen herself from her first real paycheck as Blackwood Industries' newly appointed Director of Survivor Services. The transformation in her appearance was striking, but the change in her demeanor was even more remarkable. Gone was the frightened young woman who had flinched at a stranger's touch. In her place sat someone who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to use it after Vincent's speech. Nora took the podium with confidence that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. "The corporate responsibility and supply chain monitoring program we're launching today isn't just about compliance," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It's about recognizing that every business has the power to either enable exploitation or prevent it. There is no neutral ground." Dr. Evelyn Carter, the trauma therapist who had worked with Nora and dozens of other survivors over the past months, watched from the back of the room with quiet satisfaction. The journey from victim to advocate was never linear, never simple, but Nora had navigated it with remarkable grace. During the networking session that followed, Vincent found himself in conversation with James Mitchell, his HR director, about the changes they'd implemented throughout the company. "The anonymous reporting system has already flagged 3 potential situations across our various work sites," James reported quietly. "Nothing as serious as what we uncovered with Ashford, but cases where employees felt pressured or unsafe. Having Nora available as a resource has made all the difference." Vincent nodded, watching as Nora moved through the crowd, speaking with equal ease to a federal prosecutor and a teenager who had recently aged out of foster care. "She's exceeded every expectation," he said. "Sometimes I think she's teaching us more than we're helping her, Mr. Blackwood." The voice belonged to Maria Santos, one of the survivors rescued from the warehouse raid. She approached hesitantly, still adjusting to environments where she was treated as an equal rather than a servant. Maria, how are you settling in? Vincent asked warmly. 6 weeks earlier, he'd personally hired her for the company's accounting department after she'd completed an accelerated bookkeeping certification program. Very well, thank you. I wanted to tell you that my daughter called last night. Maria's eyes brightened with tears. She's coming to visit next month. I haven't seen her in 3 years. Vincent felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he was reminded of the human cost of trafficking. Maria's daughter was 16 now, the same age Emma had been when she'd first started getting into trouble. The same age when Vincent had been too busy building his empire to notice that his sister was struggling. That's wonderful news, he said. Sincerely, if you need any time off or help with arrangements, just let James know. As the event wound down, Vincent found himself standing alone in his office, looking out at the Seattle skyline. The space had changed over the past months. Semma's photo now sat prominently on his desk. Surrounded by letters from survivors and awards from anti-trafficking organizations, a knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Nora entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression he'd learned to recognize as her. We need to talk about expanding the program. Look. The foundation in Portland wants to replicate what we've done here, she said, settling into one of the chairs across. From his desk, they're asking if I'd be willing to consult on setting up their corporate partnership program. Vincent wasn't surprised. In the 6 months since her rescue, Nora had become something of a legend in the anti-trafficking community. Her ability to bridge the gap between survivors and corporate executives had made her one of the most sought-after advocates on the West Coast. What do you think? He asked, though he already knew her answer. I think we've proven that this model works. Companies want to do the right thing, just don't always know how. And survivors need more than just rescue. They need sustainable paths to independence. Nora paused, studying his expression. But I also think I'm not ready to leave Seattle. Yet this feels like home. Vincent smiled, remembering the frightened young woman who had stood trembling in a hotel ballroom 6 months earlier. Home is good, he said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Watching the sun set over Elliott Bay, the city below them bustled with its usual energy. But Vincent found himself thinking about all the hidden stories playing, out behind office windows and restaurant doors, and warehouses and private homes. Vincent. Nora's voice was soft, uncertain, in a way that had become rare. Thank you. Not just for the job or the foundation, but for seeing me as a person that night instead of just a problem to be solved. He looked at her, this remarkable, a young woman who had taken her trauma and transformed it into purpose, who had found the courage to rebuild not just her own life, but to dedicate it to helping others do the same. Thank you, he replied, for reminding me what courage actually looks like. Outside, Seattle continued its relentless pace, but inside Vincent Blackwood's office, 2 people who had found each other in a moment of crisis sat quietly, planning their next moves in a war that would never truly end but could be fought one person. One story, one moment of courage at a time, in her apartment that night. Nora placed a call to a young woman in Portland who had reached out through the Foundation's helpline. As she listened to another story of fear and hope, she remembered Emma Blackwood, a woman she had known only briefly, but who had shown her that even in the darkest circumstances, one person's courage could light the way for others.